Just gonna make sure
Juan.
this is. I'm gonna publish this. I'm gonna make this public.
Yeah, throw me the deep end. Excellent.
Yeah, yeah. All right, let's just keep it unlisted for now, and let's talk a little bit. So,
Yeah, no, we should have spoken a long time ago about something less consequential, but let's dive into it.
yeah, well,
It's
I
good to
think,
see you again.
yeah, you too, man. It is good to see you. Yeah. So you made this post. Do you want to read the post that you made?
I can recite it, I think.
Yeah.
I said, this Bitcoin price has turned my friend's feed into an Amway reunion. No friend, I don't wish to profit off the backs of future investors. As a capitalist ideologue, I only seek to profit from win-win transactions.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so basically, okay. Aside from the little rub, Amway reunion, that was only half a joke because I mean, as from the eyeballs of a skeptic, you're scrolling down your newsfeed and you're seeing like, you know, this is a great boon for the future of humanity! Exclamation mark, smiley face, sparkles and hearts, and like things like that. Now, if you're not on board, you know how those things seem. You know, so there's been a lot of this euphoria that I don't blame. You know, I mean, shit. If anything I invested in went up over 100%, I'd be singing its praises from the high heavens. And to be honest, I'm not even sure I would be a skeptic or could be a skeptic. I like to think more of myself, but I'm not sure that's accurate. I'm not sure I could be a skeptic if I was heavily invested in Bitcoin early on.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, like that. So that to that last point, I mean, there's people on Wall Street. There's traders that don't believe in the things that they trade, that are traders and make money out of trading just the emotional swings of the market. So,
right.
So you can definitely be a skeptic or an agnostic of any kind of financial asset.
Right.
But I hear that like that if you're a professional, right, and if you're sort of trained yourself in that, right. But there is sort of like that. There is that sort of like yeah. So there's a kind of self-fulfilling kind of like it funds its own marketing, and its own marketing is like the bullish momentum, and so that's the sort of the extreme of the sort of emotionality of like, you know, going to the moon and all these things, right? Which is great and it's hilarious, and we are going to go to the moon eventually, and like I guess it depends where where the moon is, right? But we just keep hitting the moon and it just keeps going further, and we're gonna keep going for it, and you know we're gonna basically
I mean,
you know,
$5,000
shape the world as we take off, right?
Right, which is one of my concerns.
Yeah, so like so yeah, so let me just kind of say that, I mean, I was talking with Tone Vase yesterday or a couple of days ago, because he was at this one conference that I was at, and he was saying that he's concerned that the price might swing too high, because if it swings to like, if it gets too high too quick, then the pullback is also equally sort of like it corrects, but let's say 50%, and that's going to hurt people,
right?
And so in a sense, like if, like, this is not investment advice, but like if you're gonna buy to hold long, or buy as like, or get in as a trader, as a semi-pro or pro trader, but like buy long, because if you buy long and hold and forget about it, then you're probably gonna be all right. But if you buy at peak, right, and then you'll see the crash and you panic and you sell real cheap, you're gonna lose money. So so it does kind of depend on how you do it, but so that's just sort of like on the price game theory side of things. But there's other stuff in that post that we can kind of unpack and talk about.
Yeah, sure. I guess I meant I probably wouldn't be a skeptic in the sense of crony beliefs. Kevin Simlar at meltingasphalt.com, probably my favorite collection of essays online, I won't lie, has his latest essay, which is unfortunately from about a year ago, is called Crony Beliefs. And it shows how, you know, outside looking in, you might not understand why someone doesn't accept something as evidence, or doesn't catch your rational argument, no matter how simple it is. But just like, you know, if you're looking at a company and you're seeing this random guy getting promoted while he's doing hardly any work, it might seem irrational to you until you realize he's the CEO's nephew. You know, so he's a crony. And just like that, we all have crony beliefs that maybe our social circle is at risk if we question, or maybe our financial situation at risk, or sex is at risk. You know, there's all these things that can make our opinions pretty much cronies because they're getting us side benefits rather than on their own merits. So that's why I think if I was heavily invested, I would probably be more likely to have to be dismissive of any new evidence of, for example, NSA involvement, or to be you know, dismissive of claims that it technically fits the definition of a Ponzi scheme, which I don't know. You know, if you're coming from my perspective and you think that, you know, as James Corbett would say, the powers that shouldn't be are behind this, I don't expect them to have built a fragile system. Not too fragile, at least, not something that's just going to go the way of the dodo in a few months. So yeah, I mean, it's just to me, the whole Ponzi question, which wasn't even raised in my post, but we can go there if you like, was just based on the technical definition of the profits coming from future investors.
Yeah, I guess the sort of ethical question that you raised is more along the lines of what happens to the last people that get in, right? Or what happens to the people that get in at the top.
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah, and so like, so that'd be win-win always, right? And so there's a few layers to that. One of them is whether or not Bitcoin itself has any like an intrinsic value, right? And Wired magazine made an article about this. I didn't read it, but I saw the headline. And this debate happened like 3 years ago, pretty heavily with the gold bugs and stuff. And
right,
like where I said all the time is like, well, intrinsic value doesn't exist, like because value is subjective based on subjective value theory. If all the humans die, the gold is just going to be another rock on Earth, and nobody gives a fuck, right? Because nobody's there to give a fuck.
If your house is on a gold mine, no one wants to buy your gold. It's absolutely valueless to you.
However, there is like I was thinking about that recently, and I think that there is maybe an argument that like if there's anything like gold sort of capacity to be used in like certain like machines and for necklaces and stuff, if there's anything like that in Bitcoin, is that it's the most secure, like heavily secured database historical record in history. It's one of the slowest probably database and more sluggish database in history, but it's also the most secure. And as long as that system continues to function at more or less that level, you'll be able to put data in there that you can authenticate with the greatest amount of sort of cryptographic security and confidence that the world has ever seen. And that itself is valuable on its own, even if it doesn't become a day-to-day currency and just becomes like a store of value for like big enough purchases type of thing, like a huge savings account type of thing. Even then, it would still be the most secure database in history, and that has value, right? And so that's an interesting argument. Huh?
What makes it secure? Is that because of the hashing algorithm?
Yeah. So what happens with Bitcoin is that there's a bunch of people that are competing to try to randomly guess the difficulty of a puzzle. And that puzzle, whoever wins gets to sort of add new transactions to the history of Bitcoin. And it uses cryptography. It's a cryptographic hash. So like the input of the cryptographic algorithm creates a unique output that is unique specifically to whatever you put in before.
Right. This is why.
And so it changed, right? So you have one block and a hash of that block, and then the next set of transactions grabs the hash of the last block, all those transactions, and creates a new hash, and they're all changed cryptographically, and they're created by this competition where people are trying to randomly guess this problem. And the difficulty of that problem gets harder the more people that are playing. And so people have to invest more computing resources into trying to randomly guess this faster, to a point where there's like massive mines, farms with computer hardware trying to randomly guess this. And if you wanted to change the history of like past transactions, for example, you have to have at the very least more than 51% of the hashing power of all the hashing power in the network, which is like incredibly expensive. And that's kind of the point. It's the most expensive it's ever been to sort of Like that's why it's most secure, because it bypasses like the supercomputers by far in the world. Like if you combine all the supercomputers in the world, it doesn't even get to like 10% of Bitcoin sort of hashing competition in order to give that authenticity to it, right?
Yeah, so it's immutable. You can't edit what's there, no matter how much computing power you have, essentially.
Yeah, and even if you did a 51% attack, the history, it's still there. So you would just have two competing histories, and it would be undeniable that before that it had this amount of sort of cryptographic confidence in it, right? And that is a very, very good thing for the world, because it allows us to have immutable a space to have immutable proof of ownership over a token, and those tokens can represent things in the real world to a degree of sort of accuracy, right? And so
right. This is part of what concerns me, and I'm happy to banter about this because I've just been thinking about it in the past 2 days. Basically, I'm not sure where to start with this, but the communist knowledge.
Like the communist, if you're getting a little bit off track from like the conversation, maybe we should like settle on this one, or if it's related, then go ahead.
Oh no, well this is quite related, because I'm actually extremely curious why a lot of libertarians and a lot of anarchists are not concerned about privacy, because to me privacy and freedom are synonymous. And when I say privacy, I know that we can talk about the cryptographic functions, the fact that SHA-2 was released by the National Security Agency according to the first sentence on Wikipedia, and so on. But and also basically the blockchain is now encrypted in SHA-2. In 100 years' time, are we not going to be able to look back and decode everything that's on the blockchain today? If not earlier. So we can go talk about the cryptographic methods, but more importantly, like having an eternal, immutable, infallible ledger of every good and asset on Earth, which things like AC Chain are working on. They're trying to digitize every commodity and every good on Earth, starting with all the tea leaves in China. That's not a joke. And essentially having a serial number for every product, much like we have a barcode. Now this barcode will be the same on all the Peter Stuyvesant blues, but in this design, this barcode would be unique, okay, for every product. For every single box, it would have a unique hash representation, as would we ourselves as assets that need to be digitized and already are with our ID numbers and so forth. So then this blockchain, this asset ledger, this ownership asset ledger, I don't know, I'm not sure whatever you'd like to call it, will basically be tying your serial number to the serial numbers of all the products and commodities that you own. And then when you trade it, it'll take your serial number and instead associate my serial number with that product, so that the trade will then be logged in the blockchain, and we can prove in a court of law that we actually traded it. Now, what would stop if that situation is set up? We have a single centralized ledger of every asset, and I say centralized because the data is centralized, the data architecture.
Yeah, it's more like a standardized, like but I know what you mean. Okay.
Distributed in topography, but it's centralized, like the data architecture is centralized. Or talking about
it's unique. It's singular.
Right? Yeah, a distributed ledger wouldn't make sense. It's almost a contradiction in terms.
Right.
Sorry, a decentralized ledger. That would be multiple ledgers. But back to the point. So if we have every asset in one centralized ledger and the ownership of those assets in that ledger, then every trade would obviously be logged in that ledger so that you can prove that it's yours and that the guy can't come and claim it back. What would prevent government courts from being ordered with one flick of the pen to enforce the eternal, immutable, infallible ledger in 100% of cases? And then basically,
go ahead.
Then basically we wouldn't need a lot of politicians. We would need a lot of lawmakers. We would need a lot of judges. You've heard it said that all disputes are property disputes. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but if that's the case, and this asset ledger has logged all the property, not only are the Christians freaking out because now you can neither buy nor sell without leaving a mark, privacy is off the table, but as soon as they flick that pen and say government courts will enforce this ledger 100% of the time, everyone will flock to register their ledgers, and no one will accept a purchase of a legal item without making sure that it's marked. So untraceability evaporates from the face of the earth. And, you know, to me, untraceability is freedom. And this is a major concern. You know, it seems to fulfill, on one hand what libertarians and anarchists and communists want, and that's the evaporation of politicians. But on the other hand, we end up with this very communist style centralized ledger of everything. You know, the information was always the biggest problem. The USSR was full of halls of files and files logging everything, you know, all the assets, all the commodities in the land, and trying to redistribute them efficiently. Well, if we have that ledger, you know, at our fingertips, they can just run computer simulations over every asset and its ownership. You know, can you imagine the redistribution potentials? You know, so yeah, to me, and then yes, we will still have. I don't see how the courts and the police evaporate. We'll just have police running around, pretty much enforcing the ledger and probably getting paid by it. So I just don't get where in this situation the police and the courts disappear.
All right, so here's the counter argument to that. And this is a conversation that's been happening in Bitcoin since the beginning. In fact, it's probably one of the first and most powerful criticisms of Bitcoin is, what about privacy, right? And the Bitcoin community, at least the sort of like the generation of Bitcoin people that I come from, we were very, very concerned about that. And I wrote plenty of articles about privacy, and not just privacy for the sake of privacy as a kind of political self-defense tool, but privacy as a essential function of sound money in the form of fungibility. So let me explain that a little bit. So fungibility is a quality of money that identified by Aristotle like 2000 something years ago, which is that two units of value need to be indistinguishable from each other. They need to be essentially the same for the practical purposes of finance, right? So 1 ounce of gold has to be almost exactly the same as another ounce of gold in the purpose of finance for those to hold the same value. And the moment that you stamp one and say that this has been attached to an illegal trade and therefore it is dark money or sort of laundered money, then you start creating, you start dividing that fungibility and you create two Bitcoins in a sense. And so fungibility is essentially, and for fungibility, you need to be able to separate the source of the money from the actual authenticity of the money.
As well, yeah.
And so what the Bitcoin community has done is they've created wallet services and wallet technology that makes it so that the ledger is pseudonymous, right? And so people say that there used to be a lot of marketing at the beginning of Bitcoin that Bitcoin was anonymous, and then the sophisticated argument became, no, it's actually pseudonymous, because your name, your personal identity is not actually on the ledger. You have a public key that's associated with a private key, a secret. And if you look at Bitcoin alone, you don't know what the secret is, and you don't know who owns the secret. The only way that you can track that is if you start, let's say that you go and generate that public key from Coinbase, and you've given them your bank account ID, sort of KYC AML information. And so they have that information, and then they get hacked or they get subpoenaed, and they lose the legal battle, and the government gets that information. Now they can associate your public address with your identity. And that's one of the problems, right? And this is the where Bitcoin can become a kind of like surveillance tool for the state if people don't take care of their privacy, right? And don't make sure that they separate their sort of, they separate their sort of identity from their currency, right? Now, one of the interesting things that's happened is that it's actually like Bitcoin, because it's currency, people use it for anything that you can use currency, and there's plenty of bad things that you can use a currency for. And so law enforcement has tried to sort of find the people, and they found some people that use Bitcoin, right? But there's plenty of that have gotten away, right? Like there's a lot of sort of Bitcoin hacks that just nobody finds them, because it is difficult enough to find them. And it is kind of like a kind of battle and a kind of arms race for ability to sort of statistically try to sort of analyze Bitcoin transaction flow. But you know, that's like the counter argument is like, we are aware of it, at least I'm aware of it, and that like the new generation of Bitcoiners don't talk about it. But my generation, the generation before that, and definitely the founders are aware of that. And Segwit and Adam Back and all these people are working on ways that you can not only like encrypt the how much money is being sent from address to address, but you can also sort of have certainty that the amount that you have is on the ledger, but people can look at how much money is in the ledger, right? So it's like there's some technology that we're working on hard, or at least sort of these engineers are working on hard, and I'm sort of, I'm definitely whatever I can do to sort of help that move forward. I get it, because I agree that is definitely a threat, but Bitcoin at the end of the day is not pseudonymous, and it doesn't ask you for your name, it doesn't ask you for your picture, doesn't matter what color you are, where you're from, you can use it as long as you have enough money to get a little bit of Bitcoin and pay the transaction fees, right? That's the only barrier to entry.
Yeah, I would just add something there briefly. Another aspect I thought of when you said, if they subpoena Coinbase and so on, that's obviously a major concern, especially since there are so few choke points, you could say, entry points into the system that are really popular. But anytime, if Bitcoin reaches wide adoption, and, looking at what the statements from the government of Malta and a lot of other governments and central banks are saying, it looks like it is reaching wide adoption. I noticed the source code of Stripe already includes processing Bitcoin through it now. That's a major credit card processor that's built like by developers for developers. So also, if it reaches wide adoption, let's say you integrate it with an online payment gateway, PayPal, Stripe, whoever, all it takes is for one person to have your name or your address or something on an invoice with your Bitcoin address, anywhere. And then now you're tied to that address, your physical identity is tied to that address. So, it's not just Coinbase and so on. It's pretty much any company that deals with.
Well, but okay, so one of the things, you can create a near infinite amount of addresses, right? And so
right.
Maybe I'd be able to tie somebody's ownership to one address and its holdings at some point in time. But you can get Bitcoin in 100 different ways. You can get paid in Bitcoin, which is probably the best way to get Bitcoin, is you get paid in Bitcoin. And so at that point, you're not really investing in speculative purposes. I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me there's a good argument that no, you're engaging in barter, and therefore this is not sort of speculation, and thus capital gains shouldn't really apply, right? But of course, that's going to be up to lawyers in the courts. And so that's an interesting thing. The other thing is you can just buy with cash from strangers, right? And there's no record there, right? That's harder for sure. Big amounts is a lot harder, right? So you're gonna end up sort of having to do KYC or AML, or you just start a business, start getting paid Bitcoin, and it depends on the quality of the business or the nature of it, then you might be attached to it. And governments are gonna get in, and governments are gonna try to capture, and governments are gonna keep trying to enforce their tax laws and their regulation, and there's going to be a sort of mainstream kind of use of Bitcoin where it's over the table and legal, and taxes are paid and all that. And there's going to be the people on the fringes that know and are willing to invest the cost in that sort of level of anonymity, that are going to be able to do that as well. And so it seems to me, right?
Yeah, well, to be honest, one of my first thoughts when I read the white paper was, this is the end of self-reporting.
Right.
because if every transaction is logged to the same ledger, that's a regulator's wet dream. Right now, if we do a USD transaction or a CAD or a GBP transaction, maybe it's written in a book behind the bar counter. Maybe it's between this bank and that bank. Maybe it was an envelope with cash. There's 100 million different ledgers, more than that, of USD transactions, and those distributed ledgers are a regulator's worst nightmare. So now we come up with this currency where you have all of the transactions in that currency, or a given cryptocurrency, in a single ledger. And that just immediately struck me as a regulator's wet dream. And that's why I was suspicious of Bitcoin off the bat. And I appreciate, all the stuff you guys are working on to add privacy. But in my opinion, privacy as a strap-on kind of shows that this wasn't really anti-establishment from the start. If someone was really trying to come up with a disruptive currency, surely untraceability would be built in, or at least not publicly logging every transaction.
Well, okay, so one of the things too is, first of all, Bitcoin works through Tor. So you can use Tor, which is widely open source software, generally recognized as one of the best options that there is, even by NSA leaked documents. Which again, you can build conspiracy theories on top of that, but you have to have a standard by which to judge the truth value of a conspiracy theory. Otherwise, you have no end to that rabbit hole, right? Everybody can be trying to deceive you, right? And so like my bar is like, well, does it make economic sense or self-interest sense for them for that? Does that make sense economically, right? And it's like, yeah, okay, you can. I guess like I could see how like governments like sort of secret and like, let's say sort of NSA people came up with Bitcoin. Like, I don't believe this, but let's say that like I could see that possibility. But then what would happen is you end up with the most secure, immutable, sort of scarce monetary asset in history that makes it so governments can't print money out of thin air and fund the war for shits and giggles. That's a good thing, right? What's wrong with that, right? Okay, some dudes in NSA created it. Who cares, right? Like that's like, and I don't believe that they did, right? But like, right?
Okay, just for anyone who watches it, you can Google how to make a mint. That's a post to an MIT bulletin board by the National Security Agency in 1996, which exactly outlines Bitcoin and blockchain. And what I'm working on in my free time is overlaying the Bitcoin white paper and seeing if there are actually any differences. And it's also interesting that they credit an Okamoto 3 times in that paper. So how to make a mint.
That's fascinating. Yeah, it's like
21 years ago. Sorry, so 21 years ago, I'm sure if they're fully cognizant of the entire technology framework, and they even detail like the threats to us would be this and that, potential anonymity and so on. They've had 21 years to work on it, and I don't think they've not assigned a significant portion of their budget to this issue after realizing it in full lucidity.
Yeah. Okay. So like that's an interesting piece of information, and I'll look at that. But it's not like guaranteed some people at that level were working on it. But cyberpunks like crypto anarchist cyberpunks like Adam Back and Nick Szabo and Hal Finney and people like this have been discussing these ideas and trying to create a cryptographic sovereignty sort of tool for privacy with PGP and all this sort of cryptographic tools for also 20, 30 years, right? And so it's an arms race. Like most things are an arms race in a sense. At the end of the day, it depends how you define arms and what game and you're playing. But yeah, so yeah, I'm sure. Like, of course, like some people on the other side are going to see their way of like their own value in it in a sense for whatever political purposes they have. Well, I want to address something else you said earlier: the idea that the government can enforce the ledger on everybody all the time. And it's like, no, the government is like all the most powerful thing that the government has is intimidation. They can scare people into compliance. They can't physically actually really enforce anything on everybody at the same time. Like if 10%, 15% of people revolt, especially in the United States where they're well armed and people are motivated, it's more or less game over, especially if the people that are enforcing it get swayed by the ideas and they realize that maybe they're on the right, not the wrong side. Some of these people are actually ideologically motivated in a sense. They're not all of them are sociopathic. Not all of them are sadistic in nature. Some of them are, and some of them at high levels are, but some of them are actually trying to do good within their knowledge, right? And so once they see, oh shit, this is dark.
Right, but I'm worried is that they won't see anything dark about it. They'll think it's an upgrade because humans have always been a weak point, let's say, a point of vulnerability in government. And so if you can turn over governance to something non-human, there goes most libertarian arguments, because most libertarians, all they know about, their only reason for being libertarian is that no human has a right to rule another. So what if it's a non-human? What if it's an eternal, infallible, immutable, perfect record that we all contribute to, the ultimate democracy in that sense, that is essentially issuing out the contracts to the people who build things for social goods and paying the cops to enforce any property violations according to the ledger. So this would be seen as an upgrade. The communists would hail it. The anarchists would hail it. I'm just not sure that someone who even thinks he's in it for ideological good will see it as necessarily a bad thing. They'll say, well, the ledger is right.
Well, so first of all, communists don't like land ownership and property rights of things outside of their own themselves, right? And some of them may even believe that you don't own yourself, but then you walk them through that with five questions, and they realize that they believe in self-ownership, right? But so first of all, communists wouldn't like it because it's basically the best way that you can record property ownership that you can think of. And how is that a bad thing? How is that a bad thing? Like the worst case scenario is you can identify the owner, but you can already identify the owner of property today anyways in your government. It would make just more efficient. And hey, if you're gonna have that problem, at least let's solve it quickly, right? If you're gonna have to deal with the government, at least let's hope it's efficient, right? Like the worst thing about worst things about government is that it's fucking terribly inefficient, right? Like if you go to the DMV or try to do any kind of paperwork, it takes forever and it's super expensive. Well, if it's quick and inexpensive, at least you can get settlement sort of fast enough. But like,
I quite like a human government being full of holes.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's interesting. So this is an interesting thing about libertarians, like the new sort of breed of Bitcoin libertarians, that I don't know that they don't see this, and it's fascinating that people aren't sort of praising this and realizing how powerful this part of the Bitcoin is that, yeah, no, so, okay, you want to have property. How do you prove that you own something against a claim of it? So somebody claims that they own what you say you own. How do you settle that dispute? There's no more secure way to authenticate property ownership than Bitcoin. Even if you can create a hash of a document of ownership, let's say, right? And you can put that hash in the blockchain, and nobody knows what that hash reflects because it's just like an output that is sort of like 20 or 30 digits long. So you can't go back from that to the source, and you could use stronger cryptography like 512 or whatever, and you bypass the theoretical quantum physics sort of potential.
But if you're ever challenged, you have to reveal the true identity.
If you have a challenge, you can, yeah. But then how would the challenge occur? Maybe it would happen in a private settlement court, or maybe it would.
Sorry, maybe like the government issues a census, and they issue a property census, which essentially challenges
people lie. People lie, and people
then
lie.
They need to show that then they lose their property. They're going to show that their serial number matches the serial number on the property.
But again, like you can have 100 different Bitcoin wallets, right? So like your Coinbase Bitcoin wallet is going to be auditable and on the clear. But I'm not suggesting people break the law, but they're going to have the power too, right? And so like, yeah, okay, you have all this sort of white label Bitcoin, but then you just also get paid for gigs over here, and you buy it with cash over here, and all that stuff is off the record. And to whatever degree you can keep that private and secure, you're going to be able to sort of be fine. And the technology, hopefully that's the arms race. We need to make sure that it's easy enough so you can do that. And so that's where the battlefront has shifted to. It's in the sort of ease of use kind of problem, but an education problem, right?
Yeah, my concern is that the only way I see people using one, well, it's been a concern of mine for a little while about blockchain-based systems. But basically, each one assumes that it'll be the only one for that industry. For example, we've got Muse for artists, which I love at Cobb.
Everybody has no
tracks actually behind it. But Muse, for example, almost assumes that it'll be the only platform which artists will be selling streaming usage rights to their music through, because it's the usefulness problem. Much like Facebook is almost the only social network out there, or at least people who have accounts elsewhere also have one there. Bitcoin wants to be the only strict currency. AC chain wants to be the global asset ledger. So all it takes is for a government to pick their chain that they're going to enforce, and then everyone will register with that one or stand at risk of losing their property. That's my main concern, is that when we do have all the assets in one ledger.
So what though? Like, okay, so you have immutable proof of ownership, and the government is going to enforce that. Yeah, okay, it sucks that there's a government, but it's enforcing property ownership with the highest degree of integrity that we've ever conceived of, right?
Well, until it gets the ability to, let's say, delete your serial number out of it, or to redistribute.
Well, it can not honor. Well, no, because it doesn't, right? That's the thing about Bitcoin. Like if Bitcoin sort of stays.
Well, past, but
you can't edit the past, and like as long as Bitcoin sort of mining is geopolitically distributed, and there's enough sort of separation of powers between the miners so that one of them doesn't have a large majority, let's say 60%, right? Theoretically it's 51%, but it's, you know, and even then, like the minority could just fork off and go on their own chain, and then and change the mining algorithm and reset the game. It's sort of the nuclear sort of power. And yeah, that would split it. But at the end of the day, these things are about confidence, right? It's about confidence in the integrity of the ownership of the thing, that of people that are sort of savvy enough to recognize it, and even maybe instinctively some people might get it at some level, but at the end of the day it's confidence, right? And so yeah, the government has GovCoin. Who gives a fuck, right? You can still play with Bitcoin. They have to compete against the most confident, most secure thing.
Well, yeah, that is kind of begging the question, because you know that I do think that Bitcoin is GovCoin.
I just, it's you like, this is my frustration with anarchists, man. It's like you can't, it's like you can't conceive of the possibility of the good guys winning.
Well, no, but I can't.
Like we're doomed then, right?
I was working on 21 years ago. It's not just it's not just you know, yes, when I first read the paper and noticed that the data,
like how does pseudonymous distributed immutable property ownership benefit the greatest, most effective thieves in history?
Well, because they currently own most of it, so they can get their entries.
You don't know that for a fact. You're speculating on that. You don't know that for a fact.
161 million different hectares that Obama declared of ocean water being government territory. That's all going to get put in the blockchain, is there?
Yeah,
it'll solidify their own.
Who's going to honor it though, right? Like okay, so that's part of the problem. Like, who's going to honor that, right? Like their only capacity to enforce that is their military power, right?
Yeah,
but
exactly. Which 99.9% of the world still thinks is a good force.
Yeah, so I mean that's a social problem that Bitcoin can fundamentally solve, because Bitcoin is sort of like it's a closed system, and how do you turn a house into a digital hash is quite the problem, right? And so you would do like huh? What's that?
I'm sorry, I can't go. They did release the hashing algorithm. SHA-2 was released by the National Security Agency.
Okay, so
what it replaced?
Hold on a second. You're misrepresenting that. So like, to my understanding of how cryptographic protocols are developed, right? What the government does, because they're in need of secure communication systems, so that the competition doesn't fuck them, right? What they do is they create a competition, and they put a bounty, and they say, hey, bring us the best cryptos, right? And then a bunch of people come and create the best crypto sort of solutions. And like one of those algorithms was revealed to have been sort of like, there's a backdoor in it, but most of the other ones are fine, right? SHA-1 was apparently sort of like, they found some collusion attacks, right? Which is, you know, there's some problems with it, but it's not it's not completely broken, right? Some researcher, right? I don't know, right?
Okay,
so like, and these are cryptographic systems that the military relies on, right? Like the military doesn't want to have a encryption thing that has a backdoor that the competition can find, like China can find it or Russia can find it, right? So like, this is the thing, like governments also need very, very secure encryption. And so they want somebody to create very secure encryption. They just don't want the populace to have that, because then they can't enforce their own laws. But that stuff is open source now, right? And so like, what are you going to do about it, right?
Right. So you don't think the NSA was behind Heartbleed? I mean, it's public record that they paid RSA, which replaced $10 million. That's all it took to build a bit of non-randomness into their elliptic curve. So the same company, the same department that did that, you know, one of their two prime directives is to crack cryptography. They release a cryptographic hashing function, and you trust it.
Okay, so my understanding of RSA is that it has a secret. There's a secret stored somewhere that has to do with the way that the algorithm works. And if that secret gets revealed, the algorithm breaks, right? That's believe how RSA works as well, right? So there's certain that's one kind of cryptographic algorithm. There's other like SHA-256. I don't think works like that. You can look at all the variables and it's still secure, right? Like, it's actually open source. And maybe you can correct me on that. Maybe other people can correct me on that, but that's my understanding, right? So, okay, I don't know how much SHA-2 is used in Bitcoin. I know SHA-1 is used. I know SHA-256 is used. I know there's another one, I think Nest or something like that. I'm not sure what it's called. And so, yeah, so there's certain ones that that are not trustworthy, and yeah, of course the NSA is going to try to bribe somebody to get that secret if it's there. That's fundamentally centralized, right? But I mean, if like my understanding is that yeah, some of this sort of crypto that's used in Bitcoin is actually open source fully. Like there's no secret that some company holds, and so you're just dealing with physics at that point, right?
Well, is it not? I would like to believe it's secure. I find it hard to believe that they would release a fully secure thing without a backdoor, since that's one of their two prime directives. To the other one being snooping on us, and the first being to crack encryption. So the company whose prime directives releases encryption, I'm not going to trust off the bat.
I think it's like the government is incompetent though, right? Like they need to rely on corporate competition in order to create things. And so.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree with you on that. But then let's assume it is secure. What is Bitcoin if not the biggest encryption cracking project the world has ever seen?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Are you a cryptographer? Because I don't know how to answer that question. But if you're
I'm not a cryptographer by trade, but I have looked into a lot, and I've done nothing but development since I was a teenager. So yeah, it's all I've done.
So the question is, can you? And this is like way beyond newbie talk, but like. Can you repurpose Bitcoin mining hardware to target other algorithms? And I've asked people this question, and the answer is no, you can't. It's very specific. Like ASICs are specific to this algorithm for this problem. They're built hardware, like at a hardware level, to do that. And so that's the only thing that they can do is randomly try to guess this particular sort of algorithm, right? But yeah, I mean, if you could repurpose them, you're right. It's a brute forcing machine. Yeah.
Well, not only repurpose, but have you ever been to one of these MD5 decryption sites, which doesn't actually decrypt MD5, but it just indexes any pairing that's ever found. Now, this is what's happening whenever someone solves a block, is that the solution is indexed. Otherwise, you wouldn't know that the block's been solved. So we're actually building up an index of these solutions for cryptographic problems, and that strikes me as a little suspicious, given who employs the most cryptographers.
Well, okay, so yeah, that makes sense. But the question really is, how big is the set of potential addresses and sort of associations? And if the pool is like if the amount of indexes we can find the next 200 years is this big, and the pool is like 300,000 times bigger, then it doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
Right?
That is a good question. I'd love to know more about that. But
I believe like SHA-256 and like the amount of addresses that can be created is more than the amount of atoms in the universe, according to our current knowledge of atom, right? And so at that point you're good, right? That's what I was told by an security engineer a while back. So I mean, I haven't fact checked it, and but pretty sure that's
one of Google's techniques that they've been using to get a leg up on the competition is to use lots of low-powered servers instead of a few high-powered ones. To distributed computing. So I would think that if I were given a few $1 billion and told to crack encryption, I would pretty quickly realize that I couldn't do it with a few supercomputers in Utah. I would want to try and distribute it, and then I'd look at projects like SETI and see how they'd gotten other people to donate their processing power to it and so forth. And here we have this massive, what could be looked at as a distributed network of computers that are all working on cracking cryptography around the clock.
Yeah. So again, like I don't think we should engage in this conversation unless we had a competent, sort of very, very knowledgeable cryptographer that can actually explain this stuff to us and sort of make it make sense. Otherwise, we're just spreading FUD without knowledge, and that's not a good thing at all.
Right, which might be hard since cryptography is almost by definition complexity.
Yeah. I mean, you can explain, like we can predict and explain and understand the mathematical equations, right? But like, so like we can't really sort of really have certainty about that unless we have had a cryptographer here with us. But like I've asked a few people this question because it's a legit concern. It's a fascinating concern. It's like, oh wait, can you repurpose these things to just attack cryptography? And the answer that I've gotten from like people like Ethan Buckman or I'm gonna ask Adam back because he's actually sort of reachable, is and the answer that I've gotten so far is no, you can't, because it's designed to do a very, very specific thing. Huh?
I find that to be a strange answer. I couldn't intuit why that wouldn't be the case. But yeah, let's leave it to when we've got someone who knows more about that on. Yeah, so basically, if you'd like to just touch back onto topic before.
Well, I think we've kind of done. Yeah, I mean, if there's anything else you want to finish on, then we can do that because it's long enough probably already.
Yeah, well, essentially, I would just like to back to the capitalist ideology. Just say that, you know, if I don't know, I know I'm talking to, if anyone ever watches this, people who have benefited a lot personally from Bitcoin. But I would just say, let's not make something that doesn't grow the economic pie the primary focus of our efforts. Let's still be good capitalists and go out there looking for win-win transactions rather than investing in something for the purposes of watching it grow and hoping to sell before it goes down, which is the internal reason that I think almost everybody I know buys in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a kind of like self-serving sort of trolley nihilism in cryptocurrency people. And then like I understand it because it's sort of that trading potential that you can sort of buy cheap, sell high, and you've just made a shit ton of money, right? And you're essentially selling to people that are either buying long-term whenever they don't care, or they're noobs and they get in and they're like, oh shit, they buy it and it crashes, and then they lose, but they now have the potential to learn something about money and investment that they didn't know before. And it's gonna hurt, right? But hopefully they're not dumb enough that they put all their monny in it. And if they're dumb enough that they put all their money in it, well, it sucks that you're burned, but you kind of like need to figure your shit out, right? And so like at what point do you just sort of like at one point you just say, well, it's your responsibility to do it, to sort of be sort of a little bit more careful with your money, right? And people should be careful with what they put their money into and sort of learn and not just sort of gamble. Because if you're a gambler, okay, you're going to lose sometimes, right? And so again, like it comes back to personal responsibilities. Like at some point, like I just like, well, too bad, man. You played and you lost, and that's the way it is, right? But I think if you're going to play, they should play sort of smart, right?
Yeah, none of my arguments are saying, I would never say to people that I think Bitcoin's going to tank next year or anything like that. Especially because of who I think is behind it. You know, like I said, I think it's in for the long haul. And I agree with your advice entirely. If you're going to buy it, hold it. Don't just buy it hoping to ride the train up and then drop it at the top. We're not going to be able to stop that. A lot of people are doing that though, especially the more people hype it through their social networks.
Well, a lot of people are going to learn about things about money that they don't know, and they're going to be better off for it, or at least they're going to have the option to. So that seems to me like a good thing. But yeah, that's more or less the game, right? And even the last person that buys Bitcoin, or at least the person to buy Bitcoin at the most expensive price in history, somebody's going to buy that. Somebody's going to buy Bitcoin at like 1.5 million or something a piece. And they're going to be like, well, I have Bitcoin, and it'll never go that high again, let's just say, right? And that sucks. But when that happens, Bitcoin will be so embedded in society that he's going to benefit from all the capital that's gone into it anyways. And those people are going to start investing in infrastructure that's going to sort of make the world better anyway. So they're going to benefit from it, whether they buy it or not, right? And so, you know, that's the trading game, that's speculation game. And you know, like this is an interesting thing about trading is that it's like it's an actual sort of win-lose competition in a sense. Like if you look just at the price chart, it's people betting against each other on the future. But from that exchange, that competition, that sort of voluntary competition, that is sort of win-lose, not really, because some people just need to sell in the moment and that makes sense to them, and some people just need to buy in the moment and that makes sense for them. And so subjective value theory holds, but as far as like the prediction of the future price goes, like with this like more sort of professional trading, from that competition that's win-lose emerges confidence about the price, and it reflects confidence in the market. And so we can now have a sense of where things are going. And that's a lot. That's capitalism is fundamentally a competition that has the potential for win-lose. Like 90% of companies fail, but the ones that win become really strong, right? And so that's you know,
I guess that's the definition of capitalism. By that definition, I don't know, you know, any casino, any scheme, you know, even the tulip mania would be classified as perfect capitalism. I guess. Yeah, I think we can.
Perfect. It failed, right?
More than win lose. I think you know, the amount of riches in the world today show us that the pie grows with every win-win transaction. And if both parties, you know, one guy is selling hoping it'll become worth less in US dollars and he didn't lose out too bad. The other guy's buying hoping it'll become worth more in US dollars and he doesn't lose out too bad. You know, there's no, I don't see how that's win-win as soon as the value corrects. You know, and
it depends when they sell. It depends when you sell, right? And at some point you might not need to sell. You can just buy with Bitcoin, right? So.
Yeah, so one aspect that I noticed that might be a loophole when it comes to this 21 million coin limit, you know, people.
Well, let's end it here, and then we can talk more if you want.
All right.
Okay, or just make that argument, and then we'll finish.
I'm just gonna say that basically when you fork it, you double it. So
no,
forking
that's not true either. So like that's not true either because you're creating a separate infrastructure system and they don't talk to each other, which is why you have Bitcoin Cash being worth $300 and Bitcoin being $4,000.
But that appearing on the market appears as competition to the original chain. So, you know, just that it's got a different icon on it and a separate network doesn't mean it doesn't have the effect of making 42-bit X. But
the value of it, like the market cap of it is much less, right? So, okay, you create another 21 billion Bitcoins in theory, but they're worth 10% of the original. The original just went up in value, right? And I'm using this sort of terms, yeah. So like, you know, I know that the big blockers are going to be like Bitcoin Cash is the original, but like that's just, huh? So
yeah, sorry, up an average traded price because we agree value is subjective, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah. So, anyways, that's yeah.
All right, cool. So we'll wrap it up there, and yeah, let's talk again soon. It's been good. Thank you very much.
Sure, man. It's been good, eh? Yeah. All right. You guys have an awesome day. Thanks, man.
You too. Cheers.